Hey guys, in today's video, you can learn to create RESTful CRUD API with NestJS, TypeORM, and PostgreSQL. Let's first open our VS Code, then go to your terminal, and here you can specify the path where you want to create your Nest project. And first we need to install NestJS CLI globally by running npm install -g NestJS CLI command. So we have successfully installed our NestJS CLI. And now let's create your NestJS project. We need to run nest new and the name of the project. We can name it to CRUD NestJS, and here we can choose the npm package. So let's wait until installation is completed. Now you can see here that our project is successfully created. So let me open the created Nest project. And you can see inside the src we have app.service.ts, its module and the controller. You can also see main.ts where we have got our backend port, and this is our package.json file. Since we will be using TypeORM, we should install it. For that, let's run npm install TypeORM and also NestJS TypeORM. We also need to install the PostgreSQL driver. For that, we can npm install pg, and also make sure you have PostgreSQL installed on your system. And now you can see our installed packages here. Let's go to app module. We will be storing our database credential in .env. So for that we need to run this config command. Here in the imports, we should use the config module for root. It will simply help in loading the environment variables and making them accessible. Now we will perform our database connection. Inside this TypeORM module for root async, we will be importing the config module. For dynamic database configuration, we can use factory here. We will include the parameters for our PostgreSQL. So here the type would be Postgres. And for the rest of parameters, let's create our .env file. And we can use the database credential here. The database host for local system can be set to localhost. 5432 will be the default port. We can set the username to Postgres. You also need to provide your database name and password. we can access it using config service.get. Here, +sign converts string to number. Since our port value should be number, we should be using +sign. So using config service, I will fetch all the values from .env for the remaining field also. We will also include our entity later here. The synchronize true will automatically update the entities to the table. We can use this for now, but you should be setting it false for the production. So make sure you haven't set synchronize to true while in production. Finally, we need to inject the config service. So we have now configured our Postgres in app module. We can use the Nest CLI for generating the full structure required for the CRUD, which is by using Nest generate resource, and we can give the name to user. We need to select REST API here. It's asking if we want to generate CRUD entry points. Just enter Y for that. Let's wait packages to be completely installed. It will simply generate all the file needed for our CRUD operation. And now you can see we have DTO, entities, and also the module controller and service for the user. We can remove this spec.ts file of service and controller. Let's proceed with our entity. We need to include entity decorator here. We'll be including primary generated column decorator. We can have the column ID inside this. The next field would be our first name with the string property. The same would be for our last name. And finally the email, which can have the unique property. In app module, let's include our user entity. Now let's run our project. You can see Nest application successfully started. So to check whether our entities are updated or not, we need to open our PostgreSQL cell. All these fields can have default value, but for password we need to configure our password. Now we are on our Postgres database. To check the table user, we can run /dt, and you can see we have the relation user table being created, which is due to our synchronization being true. And to check the column, we need to run /d and our table name, that is user. So we can see here the provided column in the user entity, which is our ID, first name, last name, and email. Let's go back to our code. And back in our module, let's also import the TypeORM repository for the user entity into this module. Now we can proceed on implementing our service. So we can inject the user repository in our service. And for the repository, we also need to include inject repository. Here we already have our auto-generated CRUD operations, but we also need to modify these. Let me add async to create function here. And let's proceed to our create user DTO. Let's install class validator first. We will be using it in our DTO. For the first name and last name, let's include is not empty decorator and is string decorator. For the email, we can use is not empty and is email decorator. The is email property ensures that it must be an email. So we have completed our DTO. Now we can proceed for the create part. For creating a user, we can also check if the email already exists or not. So let me extract the email property from the DTO. In order to check email, we can use find one method to find whether the past email is already present on our user database. If email is already present, we can throw the exception stating email already exists. In case of unique email, we can create new user in the repository. And let's finally save that user in our database. So that was all for the create part. Now let's complete our controller for the create part. You can see the service is already auto injected in our controller. So on successful user creation, you can just return success message of user created successfully. Now let's again run our project. In order to perform this create operation, we can use the Postman. Let's create a new collection. We can name it to CRUD NestJS, and here we can add request. So I'm gonna name this request to create. This HTTP request would be of post. Let's include our local host 3000 and the route would be user. Body should be raw and it should be in JSON format. We need to provide first name, last name and the email. So I'm gonna provide first name to John and last name can be Doe. Finally, I will provide the email. Finally, click on send and we can see the success status with user created message. Now let me modify these two other users' first name and last name. And if I post this with the previous created email, you can see we are getting bad request with email already existing message and this user is not created. In the bad request response, I only want the message here. So let me slightly modify the code. Here I will add the message property. Now if I again click on send, we only have the message. So our email should be unique. Let me change this email. For new email, our user is again being created. So that was all for the create part. We have created our two user. Let's proceed to the read part. We can perform for this two method. Find all will simply return all the user, whereas find one will return a single user. For find all, we can use the find method. And here in the promise, there should be an array since there can be multiple records. And for our single user, we can use find one method. And here where ID will simply match the entities with the ID field in the database equal to the past ID variable. In case of null user, we can throw exception of user not found. In case of existing ID, we will be returning the user. In the controller of finding all user, for the successful result, I will return the data as well as the message. And the same would be for the single user resulted by params ID. Back in our Postman, let's again add request named read. So this will be our GET request for the same API. And if I click on send, you can see all the created data. We had created these two users. So we have fetched all the users successfully. And if we want to fetch single user, we just need to pass the ID of user in our GET request. You can see it's only fetching our user zone since we are passing ID 1. And if I pass 2 here, we get the data of user step. For the ID that doesn't exist, we simply get message of user not found. So that was all for the read part. Now let's proceed on update operation. In our update service, we are using the update user DTO. Inside this, you can see we are reusing the create user DTO structure with partial type. So the update user DTO inherits all the properties of create user DTO but makes them optional. It is used in our update method since we may also only update few fields. We already had implemented find one method for comparing the params ID, so I can just include it. Now we can merge the fields from update user DTO into the existing user object. After merging, the updated entity is saved to the database using save method of the user repository. This will be the controller for our update method. Finally, we can return success message and the updated data. So let me create another request update. The HTTP request would be our patch. And I will update this user zone. So to update this user, I should pass its ID, which is 1. We can update its any field. I will update first name of zone to Sarah. And let me pass its ID in the path. And you can see success message along with the updated data, which has the modified first name. And if I read all the data, you can see user zone of ID 1 is changed to Sarah. And similarly, I can also check by changing user step. So I will modify this to ID 2. And first name can be set to Tony. And here is the updated data. Back in our reading user, now we also have the user step being updated to Tony. And similar to previous operation, for the ID that does not exist, we get user not found. So that was all for the update part. Now we have our last operation of CRUD left, which is the delete operation. Like in update, we will be using find one method of read for fetching ID. And the user can be deleted using remove method. On successful deletion, let me provide the delete message. Let's perform this operation now. Actually, this request should be deleted. Nothing's wrong with the non-existing user response. Let me delete user of ID 1. We have the success result. Now if I try to fetch users, you can see we have no users 1 data. And I can also delete this user Tony. And in the response, there is an empty array in the users data. So it means there is no any users to be fetched. Here we are getting empty array instead of errors because in our find all method, we haven't given any exception error like that of find one for no user. So here if I fetch single user, I get user not found. We also completed our delete operation. That's all for our CRUD operation in NestJS. In this video, we have successfully created RESTful CRUD API using NestJS, TypeORM, and PostgreSQL. Thank you guys for watching this video.